Hello, welcome to Selectmen's Roundtable. I'm John LeBeau, Vice Chairman of the Board. With me today are the other members of the board. We're back. We're back in the studio since, I don't know, sometime in early 2020. But I'm with Chairman of the Board, John Samia, Beth Cassavant, Mo DiPaolo, our newest member, Teresa Flynn. Welcome, Teresa, and why don't you take a moment and reintroduce yourself and say hello again to the people of Shrewsbury.
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm excited to be here. I've been in the role for just about 2 months now, and certainly want to thank the town of Shrewsbury and all the voters for giving me this great opportunity. I was joking around with you guys. I've been on the personnel board for 8 years prior to this, and I never got TV time, so I'm really very excited to be here, and certainly excited to be here in person.
Well, it's a great opportunity for the board to speak sometimes in a little more informal manner that we do at our meetings and get some important information out. And today we want to talk a little bit about the Beale School, the older Beale School, the one that we are leaving at Maple Ave, not the new project on Lake Street. There was a process to determine what the future use of that property might be. There was a reuse committee formed way back in November of 2017, made up of residents, business owners from the center, and it was chaired by Selectman DiPaolo. Mo, I don't know if you want to summarize a little bit about what went on through that.
Well, initially the purpose of the reuse committee, the immediate purpose of it was to tell the people in town what were the options for that property. Because the question when we started talking about the new Beale was, what are you going to do with the old Beale? Mm-hmm. And actually, Selectman Kane said, it'd be a good idea to start looking into this and see what we could do, so when people ask the question at town meeting, we'll be able to tell them. We actually didn't have that opinion by the time town meeting came, because we went into a hiatus because we were getting ahead of ourselves. The thing wasn't even voted yet, the new school. So we went to a hiatus and we started after that. But it was a public process. We had it. I think we had more than one public hearing, but it was very early on and there was no focus to it, and other than what would you like to see. And usually when you have something like that, it's all over the place, which that was. So we went through, the process became more formalized. Kristen Lass had applied for a grant from Mass Development to help us develop the concept of what Beale could be. And Mass Development did help us, and we went through all public meetings, and we dovetailed with the town center business district. I think that's how you say it. That when we talked about rezoning the town center district, because Beale was supposed to be an integral part of that. It was supposed to dovetail into what was being done at the town center, and the intention always had been from the start is something should go there that is going to help invigorate the center, whatever term you want to use, but to try to liven up the center and draw people into the center of town, and just make it more vibrant. And so the RFP committee, the reuse committee, focused basically on dovetailing into the town center district zoning and what that was doing and how this could fit into it. And and that came with a set of recommendations. We call them guiding principles of what we thought should be included on the site, or in the RFP process for the Board of Selectmen. There were 7 or 8 things. One of them was open space at the end of the parcel. Other was, it had to contribute to the vitality of the town center. And I don't remember off the top of my head what the other things were, but they were all like that. And there was also what we don't want to see. We didn't want a gas station, et cetera. And that led to a recommendation of the board, of the reuse committee to the board. The board took those recommendations, and then the RFP committee, because it had several years' experience with this process, was appointed by the board to be I might have said it wrong before. The reuse committee turned into the RFP committee and just followed along with that.
Because weren't we at the point where the reuse committee was going to probably be disbanded? And
The reuse committee was going to be disbanded, and then we'd have to have an RFP committee, and didn't seem to make much sense. We had people who had been involved with it for several years to lose that history and in the sense of what had happened all the way through. I think it worked out good.
And meanwhile, at the same time, there was a lot of other interaction with the public, including during the town center study. So, Mo, you had talked about there were several public meetings that the RFP committee had, the reuse committee, and then subsequently the RFP committee. I think there were 2 public hearings. I went back and looked at the memo. I had to refresh my memory here. But then we had the town center study, where there was a lot of interaction and surveying of the public, where there was a survey. I think there were about 380 participants, give or take. Then there was a public forum, and then there was a subsequent follow-up to see what residents wanted for use of that facility. And a lot of the feedback related to safety and walkability, as well as there was some feedback about whether or not to repurpose the existing site or develop a new site. But the responses were overwhelming, that even those people who felt that the structure was worth preserving also understood that if there was an economic or vibrant opportunity for the property, it should give way to that. So there was a lot of interaction with the town center study, for example, parallel to this process, that allowed public feedback that's been integrated so far where we are with the process.
If I could just touch on the reusing that building. First of all, it's not historic. It was about 100 years old, but it is an historic building. It's not an historic district. It really isn't a historic building. It just happened to be an old school. If the school was viable as a reuse option, we would have saw somebody come forward with it. The building, it could have been rehabilitated, but it's all about money, and it would have been so expensive to do it that it didn't make economic sense. And it would have really been expensive. And once they got into it, they weren't really going to know 100% what they were going to do. So it really, to reuse it into something new would have been very, very difficult, and it would have been very, very expensive.
And there was no one willing to do it.
And there was nobody willing to do it. And we, the reuse committee at the time, and then the RFP committee, when we went forward, said, look, yeah, it'd be nice if you could reuse it, but if you can't, that's okay too, as long as it's a good project. So, we gave people the option, but everybody I talked to in the industry said, no way that building's going to get reused.
So this is a process that began long before COVID, and I think we've all seen in our lives how, in some ways, what happened before COVID that was a whole other time. And, the reason we're speaking here today is because we did issue the RFP. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We did have one interested party, and we publicly met with them and, heard some very conceptual ideas about what they would do with the property. And that's triggered some interest from the community. Among other things, as I mentioned, some folks seem to not remember all the public things that happened prior to, but there was, as John mentioned, a public hearing, there were 3 public forums, there was a survey, and then there was a zoning change, and that was a whole public process with the planning board and going to town meeting. But we did issue an RFP, grant funded by Mass Development, and what we received was a response reflective of the specifications that were put out in the RFP. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's more to touch on that.
I don't know how deep you want to go into the weeds on it. There was a response. We were a little bit surprised there was only one, because so many entities had taken out the RFP. They downloaded the RFP. But I can tell you what we found out, because we went back and looked and said, why do we only have one? Did we do something wrong? And we talked to people in the industry, and they said, no, you didn't. But But the interest in that parcel, not surprisingly, given the economic times in the housing market, was housing. If we had put that out as housing only, we would have had 20. And we know that because there were at least 5 who had taken out stuff. And we asked them, and they said we would have bid, but we didn't want retail. So, and the other thing is, it's a site that's too small for a big developer, and it's too big for a small developer. They, use the word as a tweener. So it limited the people, the entities that would be interested in doing something like that. You have to be a certain size, and not everybody could bid on something like that.
And the important piece too, when you look at the RFP and the purposes, the words that have been mentioned about this property, catalyst, linchpin, the importance that this property will serve, hopefully, of giving that New England style feel to the center of town. And if you look at some of the language in the RFP, purposes of this is to make a significant positive impact on the aesthetic appeal, image, and day-to-day vibrancy of the town center district. So when you look at that, housing's great but in terms of standalone, it doesn't really foster what we're looking for. Serve as a showpiece for the town center that generates excitement in the community by including uses that will increase foot traffic and draw visitors from other parts of Shrewsbury and beyond. So it's that magnet. And while that was part of the whole reuse work and the committee's work and the recommendations, that is to have a project and have technical requirements, which we can talk about in more detail, but being able to meet those 8 or so technical requirements in the RFP that will drive home what the purpose hopefully is for this property going forward.
Right, and the RFP was tied into the town center zoning, because that was the whole point of rezoning the town center. There's design standards,
Parking standards.
parking standards. It's really well defined, and to have a standalone building there that didn't tie into that didn't make any sense at all. You'd have a standalone thing, and then here's the rest of the center.
Right.
But the other thing that limited the amount of entities that would have applied or would have submitted an RFP or a response. We said no single use, no single uses on that property, and we also said, as I think I said earlier, no gas stations. There were some other things, but if we wanted a single use, if we wanted to allow a single use on that property, single use retail, could be a medical office, whatever. That would be a much easier lift for somebody. Unfortunately,
It wouldn't meet these things.
it could be if it was a medical building. They build nice medical buildings. People would drive in, go to the doctor, and leave. And so it didn't do what we wanted it to do.
Right, it's not
So
gonna
that-
increase your foot traffic.
Hence the RFP that we have now.
Okay, so we issued the RFP, and I do want to mention, and I know I'm generally pretty good about stating the obvious, but let's think about it. Our center, it's not huge, so in many ways, this is the biggest single parcel up there, I think. And this redevelopment opportunity is, it's more than once in a generation. I mean, some of those buildings, the footprints have been there for as long as many of us can remember. And like other parts of Shrewsbury, the zone doesn't go very deep, and it's difficult to expand. But so we issued the RFP. We received a response, and in that response, a developer suggested a variety of mixed use for the project. And let's not deny it. We've heard some things from folks about it. So let's talk about what we received as a proposal, and we're still in negotiations, for lack of a better word. We haven't awarded this project yet, of understanding what that might be. So let's talk about what did the proponent propose for the site.
So sure, I'll start. And I think the first question is even a mixed-use project, which would compose of some commercial development. Part of the RFP was to have on the ground floor, outward facing to Maple Avenue, having commercial space, as well as some residential element. And one of the questions we received is, do we really need more housing? But a mixed-use project is really the way things are going now in terms of this type of development, where it's market driven, and the positive that we've seen in other communities that have done this in successful projects, you have an immediate captive audience for a lot of those the commercial areas that you're developing on the ground level, and that creates that buzz, that foot traffic that we're really looking to see here. Look a couple years ago at the town common, where over 2,000 people came to the winter stroll. And this is on a smaller scale, yet can be as really rolling forward and building momentum to build that foot traffic and have other people go there. So it's a mixed-use project with commercial space on the ground level and a residential component above that.
And you really need to look at this as more of an urban renewal project. This is an urban project. It isn't a standalone. It's part of something bigger. And because it's part of something bigger, and we didn't say in the RFP that you had to have residential. We said we would consider it. But if you're going to do what the intent of the zoning district was,
Right.
and try to have that property tie into that district, then you're going to have mixed use. And as you all know, I talked to over half a dozen people in the industry after the RFP came in. As a matter of fact, after we had the public proposal to the board, and every one of them said residential, and you could argue about how many, but residential is key. It's not even key, it's critical to what we're trying to do. To try to do stuff that's going to invigorate the town center, it's critical. It also happened that mixed use is the only thing that was going to work there because of the state of the economy. But for what we wanted to do, if we wanted to have a successful project and a successful revitalization of the town center, there had to be, and we were told this after, not before. We knew there was going to be some residential component. We expected some of that, but everybody, to a person, and people who weren't, they had no skin in the game around here because they weren't all from around here, all said the same thing. If you don't have a residential component, your project's going to fail.
Right.
In terms of what we wanted to do for the center, it might have survived, but it certainly wouldn't do what we wanted it to do.
Right, you need those people that live in the center that are going to frequent the businesses in the center that will then hopefully attract more businesses when they see an opportunity for other buildings that are in the center of town that we would like to see, revitalized as well. And I think it's important to let people know that we're talking right now in the preliminary designs that we had been shown, it was 50 units. So it's not a large number. Not like we're looking to place a large number of apartments in the center of town with this project, but needing to explore, what are the options open to us if we want to meet the goals of the RFP and meet the goals of what we're trying to do in the town center. We have to be open to that possibility of having 50 units there on that parcel.
And that's what I think everyone, if we're being honest about the feedback that we're getting, that is the part that people are struggling with. It's tell them about the commercial space, and they get really excited about a restaurant, a brewery, a bookstore, et cetera. And then when you say apartments, that's where they sort of shut down. But what I loved about this process is, number one, the reuse committee was not just town employees and elected officials. It was residents. It was, business owners. And then to your point, you really got the community feedback, and this proposal is really in line with all of the objectives that the community asked for.
So we've mentioned mixed use, and we've mentioned residential, and Teresa just brought up the commercial component. Let's talk about the mixed use. So ground floor business?
Yes.
And those were merely examples. It's not like we're requiring that there be a brewery or.
Well, yes,
But.
I won't make any promises.
But they've been, those types of operations have been mentioned as potential types of tenants that would be.
Well, I think that's what Civico Greeley Greenlee were going out and talking to potential businesses, and that's where they found interest. So when we were given a preliminary look at what could be, those were some of the things there.
Yeah, microbreweries.
Right.
Really
But nothing's
a trend right now.
Nothing's permanent. It's all preliminary.
And as Mo mentioned earlier about this is a tweener and the big ones and the little ones, but one thing they all seem to share, let's remember, Lakeway. I mean, you know, there is some, I mean, it's a mindset that, it's a more urban mindset. There are people who like to be, very much like to be in a environment where they can walk out of their apartment, walk, and buy things for their routine daily life. They can go to the supermarket, they can go to a couple restaurants, there's a variety of services there. Similarly, in Edgemere, we saw the same thing. The market basket proposal is an exciting one, and you know, one would think, wow, they can make it all work with just, you know, a substantial supermarket in there, but that's not how the economic models work these days. So we see construction going on the residential component there as well. So this is very consistent with the model, though, and we've always, I think, received some question about, I think everyone in town is a little sensitive about additional residential units and concern about the school population. But I think it's important to point out, and we do a study every year of how many kids come out of multifamily housing. It's single-family houses
And the neighborhoods.
is where the kids come.
Right.
And the neighborhoods, and, right, and although we all think that the apartments are heavy contributors, there's one that's a little heavy. It happens to be an older one that's more established. They're not. They just don't do it. Whatever the number was at Lakeway, it was a low number.
It was 20.
Okay, it was
20
20.
in 2020, there were 20 school children.
Right.
From
But
Lakeway.
something like 8 were already in town and just moved from another location to that location. So out of 250 to get 20 kids, you could get 4 or 5 houses and get somewhere between 12 and 18 kids.
And I mean, I'm just realizing, it's kind of fascinating that people get excited, or maybe not excited, about multifamily apartments. But you know, the town has been asked questions many times about limiting how many single-family houses we might have through zoning, and that's always been rejected.
By town meeting.
Yes.
By town
Yeah.
meeting.
I mean, there were 4, I'm aware of 4 zoning rechanges, all of which failed to change. And our zoning, our half-acre lots is relatively small, well, smaller, is very much less than what we see in a lot of our neighboring communities. Shrewsbury made a commitment to grow and
Right.
to allow housing. I mean, and not only did it make that commitment, it reinforced that commitment on many occasions when the question was asked.
Right.
So we've got a little less than 5 minutes left. Where do we go from here? And I look to you, John, because I know you earlier provided a pretty succinct timeline.
Yeah, so we had on May 11th, the developer came and presented us initial thoughts. They've had an opportunity to think about it more based on the feedback that we provided to them at that meeting. Since such time, we've also provided essential elements of what we'd expect in a land disposition agreement. So there are a couple pieces of that in terms of going back and forth on negotiating on those elements, but also drawings or sketches of what the project would look like. So we'd expect sort of the next process to be, and to be clear that as it's been in the past, the public will absolutely have additional opportunities to talk about this, is we're working with the developer to develop something more concrete than a concept. It's that concurrent negotiation of elements of a deal plus what the project will look like based on all the feedback that we've received to date and sort of meeting what reuse and the RFP required. So it's balancing all of that. That's over the next few weeks. I think we'll take a little while to have all the questions answered that we have based on what we've heard to date, and letting that mature to the point of we're ready to have the developer present that to us as a meeting later in the summer, And then from there, we'd ask our questions, and after that, we'd give plenty of opportunity at a subsequent meeting for a hearing for the public to also provide an opinion, and we'll publicize that as well later in the summer or early September. We want to make sure that we're mindful of people leaving over the next couple of months, and there's been a lot of excitement, and this project's important. You know, we've talked a lot about the importance of this project. This will drive reinvestment. This will drive really how we go forward as a town. We want to get it right. It's been a thoughtful process to date, and we want to continue that. So short term, working with the developer, getting drawings, turning concept into more of a plan, working on the essential terms of a disposition agreement, developing it to the point of, after answering our questions and really the staff's questions, bringing forward a project that, assuming that we get everything answered that we think is consistent with what the town needs, absolutely bring it forward as well after the developer presents to us for opportunity for feedback. So there's still, again, an opportunity for feedback, discussion. Part of the process, it's been transparent. It's been over several years, but we'll also provide summaries as we go forward, just so everyone knows how we got where we are and where we look forward to feedback.
I was going to say, if I could just
Please.
quickly say, number one, I think that, I've heard some concern that we only got one proposal, which we've addressed, but we like what we're hearing. One of the first questions we had, were we disadvantaged because we only got one proposal? They really do meet all of the objectives that we set forth. And I do think it's important, and you noted this, we haven't made any commitments, and we won't make any commitments until we hear back from the community. And I also think it's important for the community to know they can reach out to Kristen Loss, the economic coordinator for the town. She's always willing to speak or answer questions, and I think it's just important for people to know that they do have a voice. They don't have to wait for that public hearing invitation necessarily.
I think just to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, if anybody wanted to go back and remind themselves of where this process began and what had taken place, that everything's available on the town website, that there's a tab for Beal reuse, and it's pretty easy to just go back and trace through and be able to watch meetings of the Beal Reuse Committee, that those are available on Shrewsbury Media Connections YouTube channel and on their website also.
Yeah, and I know we only have a couple of seconds, but
Seconds.
this is different than a bid. We're allowed to negotiate here. So there's more flexibility in this process, and it actually gives the public more of an opportunity to weigh in on it, because on a bid, it's either you meet the spec or you don't, and that's it. This is different. So I think there is an opportunity for public input. And we're going to do it, and we'll see where it all leads.
Okay, I hope this was helpful to folks to just kind of reacquaint themselves to where we are in this process. It's a very exciting prospect to do some urban redevelopment in Shrewsbury Center, and please pay attention to our meetings and participate at the appropriate times. We'd very much like to hear what the community has to say about that. We're looking forward to doing more Selectmen roundtables now that we're out of COVID. We have a little bit of a commitment to try to do one a month, so we'll see how good we are about that. But we thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you the next time on Selectmen's Roundtable. Thank you. Bye now.